In this video we are going to take the jetpack that we made in Blender and take it into Unity. And then we're going to add some particle effects. We're going to make the fire and the smoke. And I'm also going to show you how you can use scripts to control those, so you can easily blend between different particle settings. And that is really cool because I think one of the most awesome things about like engines is how they're starting up. It's just, I don't know, just fascinating. Could watch it all day. And in a game that is also fun. You have this engine and then it's you like holding down this button and just starts shaking and gets stronger and stronger, and yeah. So let's do that. Okay, so new project in Unity. I'm gonna go with the universal render pipeline. I'm going to exclude everything related to VR in this video because obviously a lot more people are interested just in the general stuff and don't have a VR headset. And then in the last video I'm going to do everything related to virtual reality. I'm going to set it up for the Quest 2. But yeah, so for now just choose the URP, and if you really want the SRP, there's just one tiny thing we're going to do different here, which is we're going to make a custom material for the particles because the standards kind of look like shit. But if you use SRP you don't have to do that, so you can skip that step. So let's go ahead and create the project. Here we are in Unity, and first of all I want to get rid of the fog effect because when we're going to work on effects we want to see the true colors and not how they change in the distance. So you can go into Window, let's see, Rendering and Lighting. You can open this. You can also just dock the tab somewhere here if you need it again, and in here if you scroll down, let's see, Scene, Environment tab, and here we have the fog, and just click it and now it's gone. Okay, now the next problem is when we add a particle system, and just right click here in the assets and say Effects, Particle System. They have this weird dark ring around it, and I couldn't find like a simple setting that would change it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to make our own material. Since we use URP, we're going to have shader graph installed with it anyway. And yeah, so if you are still using like the standard render pipeline, then you don't have to do that, because then your particles are probably going to look a lot better out of the box. So let's go into materials. Now first I'm going to show you. So if you select the particle system, inspector, and you scroll down, the last tab is the renderer. And here you can see which material we're using. It's called Particles Unlit. Unfortunately it's read only, and that's why we're making our own mods. Okay, so in the asset, let's make a new folder called shaders. Double click to open, right click, create. And then we're going to go to shader, universal render pipeline, and we're going to go with a sprite unlit shader graph. Should be enough for now, and call it simple particle. Something's wrong. Okay. Now let's open up the shader by double clicking. I'm going to click in here and then hit Shift and Tab, so this becomes just one thing. And yeah, what we want to do now is we want to assign a texture and then tell the shader, okay, you know what, just show me this texture. That's really it. So here click plus, choose texture 2D. And it's quite important to call it main text, exactly like I've written here, so it knows it's just going to take the standard, whatever is assigned to the sprite renderer. Might actually not be that relevant for our particle system, but maybe if you use this shader for like a normal sprite that is sprite renderer. Anyhow, take the texture, drag it in, click this output node, just drag it into nothing, and then it's going to suggest all the possible output nodes for this one. And just type in sample texture 2D. Okay, so it's going to take the texture and it's going to give us this nice output nodes, And we just take the RGBA, so the color and the alpha, and we can drag that in here. And yeah, so this one is split. So just grab the alpha and drag this into the alpha. And so this is the final output. And let's see, if we click the main text here, then on the left side we can choose a default texture. Do it like this, and then we right click and show it as a quad. Okay. Now save this, shift and space. I think I said shift and tab, sorry. Shift and space is the way to make it bigger and smaller. Let's just try out if our particle system is using that. So in here, particle system, renderer, and here where we have the material. Oh, we need to make the material, sorry. So we can just do that. Let's see, shaders, you select this, right click, and then when you say create material, it's automatically going to use that shader. And then we say simple particle, I just call it matte. I know it's quite obvious with the icon, but sometimes I like to do that. And then I just drag that into the materials folder. Click one more time. Okay, let's see. Particle system. And now we just drag in the simple particle matte. And yeah. One interesting thing you can see now is that like the order in layer, obviously the ones that are bigger are closer to us, so they should be rendered on top. Let's see, we can go into sort mode, it says none, we say by distance, and that looks much better. Okay, so now we already have that, and yeah, so obviously we want to use our own texture. I'm just gonna copy basically the standard particle, just like this round with a soft edge. You can do anything. You can also do like animation and stuff, but yeah, just gonna keep it really simple. And even as we probably all know, with this like simple round ball, you can do so many effects. And so I'm just gonna use Krita, and once again, you can use pretty much any painting program should be capable of doing that. I'm gonna choose texture because that gives me 256 times 256. I'm going to make the background black first with the fill tool. Make a new layer and choose a round brush. Let's see. Brush presets. This looks pretty soft. I'm gonna choose pure white. And of course I'm going to reduce the size of this. I'm going to go with a lower opacity, maybe even around 50, a little bit like this. Click it a few times. Well, not actually, this might just work already, but I'm just going to make this one smaller, click it a few more times. Actually gonna make it a bit bigger. I think I want all of this to be like full color. And you can of course change the opacity of the particle at any time with the particle system. Anyhow, now we have this like round ball, and then I'm going to deactivate the background. That was just to help me. And then I'm going to export this as a PNG. So file export. And then I just bring it into Unity. I'm just gonna drag it into materials too. Now we just have to tell our shader to use this texture. So I'm gonna select the material, and here we can choose the texture. And now I say, should probably have deleted all this default stuff. Yeah, so particle texture, that's the one I did. Select this, okay. And now we have what looks pretty much like the standard particle system. And while we're making shaders for the particles, I took a quick break and tried to make one that takes high dynamic range colors and combines it with the particle system. The result isn't perfect, but it works pretty nice for what I had in mind. So for the fire, I want the high dynamic range shader, because that means we can set the intensity and that can get picked up by post-processing effects like bloom, and that way we can make it, giving it this like nice glow. Oh, and also if you're wondering why am I talking about fire and smoke here all the time, it's because I'm using a rocket as a reference, which is not realistic, but it just looks way cooler to have like this like big ass flame and then this long trail of smoke coming out of it. Even though like a light glow would be more realistic and nothing else. But yeah, we're making something that's supposed to be fun. Okay, so this is the HDR shader. And there's one tiny pitfall, which is that when you're in the particle system and you have the start color field and also the color over lifetime field, the gradient here, what's happening is it's accessing this node called vertex color. So if you were to do like what's I think the standard, you take your texture, multiply that color with the HDR color and put that out, it's not gonna work here. So you have to do the vertex color node. So just hit like space and I'll just search vertex. So input geometry vertex color. We take that color and multiply it with a color field. We just made that here, so just click here plus color and then you have a color. Combine that and use that for the base color, and the alpha we're still going to get from the texture. And one very important thing is you have to click the color, and here in those extra settings the mode is of course default by default and then you switch it to high dynamic range color, and that's the important thing here. And so as you can see, it's not perfect because we're still taking like this color and then we multiply it with the particle color. So if, for example, in the, I think you want actually, let's just try it out. What I'm trying to say is the color gets multiplied, so you don't have 100% control. Like right now, there's always some white in it. So first of all, okay, so I already extracted the material, right? I made the shader and then again just right click, create, and then you choose material, and then we'll be using that shader, and that gave me this one. Let me drag that in the material folder real quick, and then shader graphs. So okay, so color, I had it set to this yellow, and intensity is 3.4. But what I'm trying to say is if I use this, and let's see. First of all, in the renderer, we assign the material. As you can see, it's nicely glowing. But if I set the start color to something like green, or even like this, it's always gonna make this like weird multiply. So yeah, here you can see it pretty clearly. And the reason is they're opposite here on the color wheel, so they're just multiplying each other, and then you just get way too many colors. And so like cyan is also this greenish, it's just yellow again. So that's just what I'm trying to say. You have to be careful. You can find like good combinations, but you just have to try out a few. So you see like, okay, white isn't too bad here. And here we're gonna use some colors too. And then you can always just go back to the material. Also maybe copy it a few times so you don't lose your nice combinations, and then set the color here. Also intensity, again, you just have to try it out, because you can set the intensity here, then you can set like the bloom. I think we're gonna do that in the end. But yeah, let's move on and import the Jetpack model. So here I made a new folder called models, and let me just drag that in. So now we have the Jetpack, we can bring it in the scene. Okay, cool, it's at 0, by default. And as you can see, the material something is not working, and the reason is that the texture doesn't get exported with the FBX. So you have to do that manually, or rather, we have to make our own material. So we have the machine colors here, and once again that is read only. But we can either right click here and say extract from prefab, or if you click the entire model, you have like those cool import settings, and if you click on materials, you can say extract materials. Then you choose a folder, maybe folder materials, and now it disappears here, and you have this one called machine colors, and this one you can edit. And all we have to do now is tell it when it comes to color. Here it's asking for base map. Right now it's nothing, so it's using basically nothing. Color, this is more like an overlay tint. Okay, so we're gonna leave that white, just like a sprite renderer. And I think, let's see, under materials, I'm just gonna drag in the jetpack colors. So that's the PNG, the same one I used in Blender, and then I can just grab that and put it in the base map. And now you see, this looks mostly what we had in Blender. Colors aren't like that great. Actually, they kind of really suck. Anyhow, let's reduce the smoothness a bit. Like more typical low poly look. And metallic map, let's see. Just something like this. Okay. So we already have the particle system. Let's do the smoke first. So let's grab this and make this a child of the body. And let me call this smoke. And then set the position to 0. Now the position here is of course relative to its new parent. So if it's 0, 0, it's right in the middle. And then just drag it on the Y. And now we have to rotate on the X. Oh, it already is rotated. I always think it's 90 and then it's not. See, it's 180. Okay, so let's see. First of all, let's switch the renderer back to the simple one. So it's nice and gray, and okay, so start speed, that's fine. Start size, let's make it a bit bigger. Say 2.2. I'm just gonna go through some values I had before. Simulation space, it's very important to set that to world, which means that the moment they get spawned, they no longer care about the position or rotation of their parents. So it's kind of like they're getting unparented, which is of course what we want. Otherwise, every time you rotate the engine, like the entire smoke trail moves, and that looks really weird. Emission more, a lot more, maybe like 200. That looks
Power
more
off.
like smoke. Shape, cone is quite alright. Now of course the angle, I think it's nicer to have it a bit thinner. And again, this isn't too realistic, but it just looks cool when you fly like a curve, and then you see like the smoke trail is like exactly the way you flew it. So that way, which is why I'm just gonna keep this like pretty narrow. But the radius should be a lot smaller, like where it's getting spawned. Let's see, I had 0.4 here. That's still pretty big, but before we change that, let's check size over lifetime. So when they're getting spawned here, they are at 0 of their start size, and only in the end they're actually gonna reach the start size. And I think we can just increase that, like 0.5, maybe a bit smaller. Okay. Another very important thing is color over lifetime. So let's see. Let's just click in here, and it's a gradient. So on top you have the alpha, or rather, let's say like here on the left, that's like when they're getting spawned, and that's their entire lifespan. So right now we are at lifetime 5 seconds, so this is like the 5 seconds. And then in the end, that's when they die. And then you can say like at which point you want them to have which alpha and which color. So on top we have alpha, and I think they should obviously never be fully opaque. So I'll set that to 106, we're getting spawned. And I think they should like slowly decrease, and only in the end. Oh, now I made 2. So if you click anywhere, you make a new one, and if you delete, you can remove it. And in the end, they should definitely reach 0. Let's see. I think this looks a little bit too fast. Like in the end. So maybe let's make it like 2 steps here. So 57, okay. Bring it down a bit before. Something like that. So I know it's a really long trail. And then let's also limit the velocity over lifetime a bit. It's gonna look somewhat weird, but of course a lot different when this thing is actually moving, because you don't want the smoke to be like continually moving in that direction. So let's see, we have limit velocity over lifetime, we can use that, and I think I'm gonna use the drag. And unfortunately it's like really intense, so 0.1, as you can see already, like halfway they're not gonna be moving anymore. And that's something I think we have to play around a little bit in the end, when we do this thing while moving. Let's check the color again. So first of all, I think there should be a little bit of color. So maybe make it a little bit darker, maybe somewhere in the bluish range here. Nothing like too intense. Keep it light. And of course, if you want like some really thick dark smoke, you can do stuff like this. You just make it like almost black. But I'll just keep it here. Actually thinking if we even need that, because you can just leave it at whatever it is. It's a tiny bit darker, and yeah. Again, totally up to you. I'm just showing you really how to do it, and then the exact details, you should just play around with it. One more thing. We should probably start with like 0 alpha, because when you have this thing, I think it looks nicer if it connects to the fire, and that's kind of what it looks like, you know, just as if it comes out of nothing. There's like this little bit of clear between the smoke and the fire usually. So just click here, so you get a new one, and then we can make this 0. And so at first it goes from 0 to 106, like right here in the beginning. Okay. I think this is pretty much it. I might increase the speed. We might actually do that by script. Let's see, so the emission. This one's going to be by script too, but of course we need some reference. So now, however, I want to make the fire. So I duplicate this particle system and call it fire. And we don't need to limit the velocity. And actually, talking about velocity, so the shape that we want here, sorry, first of all I'm going to hide the smoke, so we see the new one. I want the opposite of a cone. I want them to kind of go towards one point. And we can do that quite easily by setting the start speed to something negative. It looks like they're still getting bigger, but just I think if we take out the size of a lifetime, let's see, start size, something small. Oh yeah, okay, so what's happening is they are actually getting like made towards a cone, but then they're getting bigger again. So this just takes a bit of like filling around. It's always the same. They go to one point and then they just spread out again. So you just have to find the right combination of values. Also, we should rotate this back to 0. So now it's like this way, and Z can be 0, or rather just a little bit here. Also, we wanted to change the renderer, right? So instead of the simple one, we are now going to use the high definition one. Let's do the shape. course still using a cone and the angle. Okay, so this is kind of like it's funny, it's like the other way around here when you use the angle. Like the bigger you make it, the thinner it gets here, so to speak. So just 6.2 was my value, radius 0.45, can be a bit bigger, thickness 1, okay, and that was pretty much it here for the shape. Let's see, I have the start speed. Obviously the lifetime has to be lower, and I think it looks cool if we use a random between two constants, so we get like this flickering effect. So I'll say 0.1 and 0.3. So it's anything between those two. Space is of course world. No, actually, it doesn't really have to be world. We can just make local. This is always connected to this thing. And let's see, emission way more like 1,000. And let's do some color over lifetime. And so I had made this one before. And so for the alpha, I'm starting at full alpha, gonna go down to 66 constantly, and then here I just want to pick up the speed with which it disappears. And in here I just use this really bright yellow, and then it should turn into this red, and we can actually just play around a bit here. I think this is too light now, and the reason is what I mentioned before, is because we're multiplying with white. And yeah, actually something like this. Yeah, might look cool if it turns even a bit darker. Yeah, let's leave it at here. And then sometimes you switch the bloom and then everything is white again, and then you switch the post-processing and everything is just too dark, and it takes a while to just find the right values. And I think there's no like do this and that. You just have to play around with it a bit. So anyhow, now we have some fire and we have some smoke. We turn that on, and if we like control or shift select both, we can see them running at the same time. But I shouldn't have said that because the damn smoke isn't working. Yeah. So I think the smoke should start faster, and then just still slow down, but at least like the first here in the beginning, it should really be like you feel like there's this crazy thrust coming out of this thing. Let's see, start speed, something like this. And we might dampen it even a bit more. And yeah, so once again, I'm not gonna decrease the lifetime, even though there's like so many particles all like in one spot right now. But once we're flying with this thing, those are the ones that are gonna be stretched out and show us like the trail that we were flying. But I'm gonna increase the dampen just a little bit, the drag, maybe 0.13. So at least it's fast closer to the fire. I think that's what looked too strange. Yeah, I think that's looking better. I'm gonna turn those two into prefabs because I want to keep those values, and the idea is now I'm gonna play around and find some values that represent like a really low thrust, and then I know this is the maximum thrust, and then I see what I've changed, and then that's what I'm going to do with the script. Also realize I should move this inward a bit more like this. Okay. So I'll make a new folder called prefabs. And then I'm going to unpack this prefab. So select it, right click, prefab, unpack. Just so the values are really like locked in. And fire, right click, prefab, unpack. I just took a quick break to find some values that could represent like the minimum thrust. And for the fire, the only thing I really changed was the speed, the start speed. So if we make this -4, I think this looks like a just a little bit of fire. The problem is you can't really change the emission, because if you make it 100, then you see the individual particles and it doesn't look that good. Same when you change the start size, that just doesn't look like fire anymore. One thing you could do is change the opacity of the start color. By default it's 255, so when we change it over lifetime, it takes that into account, right? So if you make this lower, can even go like super low. I think this looks at least more fire than more like fire than changing the emission to something low. Then you could increase it. But the only thing I'm going to do for now is the start size. We're going to do that with the script. For the smoke, I want to change the amount of emission. I think 100. So this is the minimum. Also the speed. Okay, so we have our low fire and we have our low smoke. And you can also see it doesn't look that good anymore that it's so far away. But we're also going to change that with the script. This is the particle controller script that is going to sit on every particle system. It's responsible for listening to changes in thrust, and every time that happens, we're going to adjust the particle values. And we're always concerned about the minimum and the maximum. Those are the values we just set. So we know we're always moving in between those two particle systems or particle settings, so to speak. So here I have a serialized field for the particle system, just call it sys. There's one thing that might seem a bit strange when working with particle systems, and that is you can just make a field for like the entire particle system and then say something like sys.main.startSpeed equals 1f. It's actually going to give you an error saying like, no, you can't just modify it like this. What you have to do is you always have to take the subsystem of the entire particle system that you are modifying and make a field for that. So main module is actually a subsystem, and it's simply the first one here. So this is the main module, and then you have emission and shape. Those are all the other modules. So we have a field sysmain, and we assign this by saying sysmain is equals to the system, the serialized field, dot main. And now we can actually change those values. The way I understood it is that particle systems, they use an interface. So they might sound a bit weird, but it's really pretty straightforward once you get this. Just save the subsystem in a field, modify the values of that field, and that's it. So here we have this method called setStartSpeed, and it's going to take a float thrust in percent. And that means the percent between the minimum and maximum, because then we can use that and just grab the in-between of the two values we have. Now let's take a look at the thrust controller. This is the script that's going to sit on each individual engine. And I just wanted to keep it simple for now and just read some keyboard input. When we hit space, we're going to call a method called change thrust. And this one takes parameter change by. And now this is absolute values. So if we take a look here, we have the min thrust and the maximum thrust. So that can be anything you want. I don't know, like 10 or 100, whatever. So this is absolute values. Then we have the current thrust, which is also in the absolute value, anything in between. And then we have the thrust in percent of max. I know it's a bit of a long name, but I never got confused. And then we also have serialized field change per second by input that you already saw. So just to make sure we have some value to play around. So you may have noticed we're not using get key down, but we're using get key, meaning if you just hold it down and then change per second. So in 1 second, whatever that value is, we're going to change the thrust by. And we're going to do that. We receive the change by, and then the current thrust, we're going to clamp this value. So what we're saying is we want the current thrust to be equal to what this method returns. And this method, the first parameter is the value that you want to clamp. So we take the current thrust and the change by, adding it. And then we say we want it should always be as high as the minimum and never be higher than the maximum. So it just gets clamped. Then we have the current thrust. Next thing, we want the thrust in percent of the maximum. And for that, what we have to do basically is what you want to know, like how much are we in between the minimum and the maximum. So you want to know like how far did we get. So that's the current minus the minimum. And so what's actually the entire distance that we're going between minimum and maximum. And so that's of course max minus minimum. And that gives us the percentage. And then we're sending out this event. So it's a public event action. And you have to make sure to use the system namespace if you use that. In here we have a parameter that we want to send along with it. Give it a name and then we assign it an empty delegate. That is to make sure that if we call this method and no one is listening, we would get an error message. So you either have to do this or you have to make sure that every time you invoke this, you make like this null check. Make sure at least someone is listening. I prefer to do it this way. And then we say event thrust change. We're calling this event and it's asking for a float to send out with it. And of course we're using the thrust in percent of max. This is all for this script. And then back in the particle controller, we can start listening to this. So we want to listening to this specific one. So we make a field, call this thrust controller, also assign this in the inspector. In onEnable, we are going to listening to every time the event thrust changed is getting called. We're also going to call our setStartSpeed method. That works because event thrust changed, sending out this float, and this one is taking a float as a parameter, so they fit perfectly together. And yeah. In onDisable, make sure to also unsubscribe. So this way we never like accidentally subscribed 8 times or something. This gets triggered 8 times for every time the event is called. Yeah, this way it's always just exactly 1 time. Okay, the other thing we wanted to do was to change the position. And since we don't always want to do that, I just made 2 fields, minimum and maximum, 2 vector 3s. And in here, in onEnable, if minimum position and max are not the same, then we're also going to have this method called setPosition getting triggered every time the thrust change is triggered. And this is here. And of course, this is pretty much the same with the start speed. But what we're changing ultimately is the local position. So once again, we're getting in between the max and the minimum position and set it to that. And of course, we're using local position because the whole jetpack is moving and we just want to move relative to the jetpack. That means in onDisable, we should also make sure to unsubscribe. And I'm again using this check to make sure that we are subscribed. Oh, as a little helper, I made those 2 methods so we don't have to set the position by hand every time. Context menu just means I can right click the script in the editor, like when it's a component of a game object, and then I can choose set min position and then I trigger the method that is under there. And then I just say min position is wherever the particle system is right now, the local position, and the same for the max. And let's see that in action. Here we have the smoke particle system. Let's assign the particle controller to it. Particle controller, so system, that's just the one that's sitting on top. Thrust controller is on the body. I assign that too. We get to that in a second. So we have the smoke, the min start speed I think was 10, the maximum was 16. Emission we're going to do in a second. That's actually a little challenge for you. And as I said before, we can now right click and looks like I have it at the max position. Actually, let's see the fire and smoke. I'm going to right click, set max position, and now it's saved this -5.5 here, position it is at right now. And let's see, the fire lowest was -4 And let's move the smoke maybe around here, and again right click, set min position. Yes, I know you could just put in those two values, but it could be more than that, and I just want to show you a new tool, hopefully. Okay, now we have those. Let's see the body. This is where the thrust is sitting on. Right now I just go between 0 and 1 and change per second, let's say 0.5, meaning in 2 seconds we should reach the maximum. And one more thing I forgot, I think here in start we should probably set those values one time. Just send it out like event, thrust changed. You could even make a field and say like what thrust you want to start with. I'm just going to send out 0, so 0%, so we're starting at the minimum. And then I'm also giving the fire particle system the same script, assign those things. And I think we're going to go between -4 and 10. As mentioned, position, we're just going to leave all at 0, so it's not even listening to that method. And then when we play, I'm going to hold down space, and you see, nice, the thrust increases quite nicely. Okay, this is it for this video. I hope you learned something and enjoyed it, and you would do me a huge favor by subscribing to this channel and liking this video. That really helps me to make more videos. And speaking of more videos, in the next video we are going to do the physics for the jetpack, and I think after that it's time for the virtual reality. Okay, thank you for watching and goodbye.